Hey everybody, it's Brian Kapple with the Athens Real Estate Company, part of the Black Diamond Property Group with Quentin Folson. Listen, we are your Athens, Ohio real estate agents. I'm going to do a quick one today. This is a follow-up to the consumer guide to agency I did, I think, last week or maybe the week before. Today, you can see on the screen, I have the exclusive buyer's representation agreement. This came about out of a lawsuit with some plaintiffs in the National Association of Realtors. This form became mandatory last August, I think is when it was. So I'm going to go over this real quick because it's a long form and we're required to do this before we can show you any property at all now. State law, actually, we have to do it. And it's really hard to build a client relationship in just a matter of minutes if we've never met a buyer prior to the showing, which happens all the time. I try to get these things emailed out to the buyers if I've never met them, so at least they have an idea of what to expect when I read over this with them. So let's get into the weeds with this real quick. As it says, it's an exclusive buyer representation agreement. It is a legally binding agreement establishing an exclusive agency relationship between the buyer and broker, right? It goes back to that consumer agency that I read not too long ago. All right. This is establishing buyers' obligations to compensate the brokerage. This is sort of a newer thing that started also last August. But up front, I'm not going to talk about any commission percentages other than to say they are negotiable, and any buyer broker compensation can come from both the buyer or the seller, or entirely from the seller, or entirely from the buyer. And this is what I'm talking about, right? Trying to establish that relationship right off the bat. So lines 7 through 9, they're talking about it's an agreement. It's entered into the brokerage, myself. The purpose, to establish an exclusive agency relationship, right? So these are the terms set forth, and everybody does it different. This is how I do it, though. So terms set forth. Some agents can make that a 6-month term. Some can make a 1-month term. Some do what I do. I do them per showing. So let's say you are one of our buyers and you want to see 4 properties. I put those 4 properties' names in that editable field, and then this agreement is only for those 4 properties. If you want to see 1 property for the day, that goes in there. That way, if you don't like me per se, or we can't establish that client relationship, then we're not going to be able to help each other out, right? I'm not going to be able to help you find a house. So that's why I just do 1 showing or 1 property or however many for that specific day. Bottom line, if you don't like me, if we can't connect, then we can't do business together. Okay. So I don't feel like it's good to lock somebody in, and work with me if maybe they're not comfortable with how I do business, or maybe our personalities just aren't able to match up. So I do the term from the day of the showing, usually about a week out. So also let me say, if we put something under contract, and it's going through the closing process, this will automatically extend through that closing process. Line 18 talks about the duties and services of the brokerage. Exercise reasonable skill and care, perform the terms of any written agency agreement. That's both parties. I am loyal to the interest of you. I am going to comply with all requirements of Ohio real estate licensing law. I will disclose any material facts of the transaction which the licensee is or should be aware of. I am going to tell you when you need to get expert advice. Sometimes that would be like mineral rights or whatever. I am going to account for all money. And then this is the biggest thing to me: keep all confidential information confidential unless you give me permission to disclose. Contemporaneous offers, that's a tough one. This just talks about that I may represent different buyers for the same house that per se you would be wanting to buy. and that it is quite possible that I may be helping others put offers in for this house. And then that's just where that trust and that client relationship has to come into. Dual agency is a big one. People do not understand dual agency. It's complicated. Buyer understands the possibility that a dual agency situation would exist in the event buyer would purchase one of the brokers' listings, and that the brokers and managers of the brokers would be dual agents. That doesn't say I'm the dual agent, right? I would represent you 100%. The broker or the manager is the person in the middle. They're the dual agent, and then you have the listing agent on the other side. So the listing agent and me, the buyer's agent, are not dual agents. It's complicated. Number 43, you have to consent or not consent to dual agency. Line 50 is a big one. This represents that the buyer has not entered into any exclusive or non-exclusive buyer's agency agreements that could conflict with this agreement. I can't represent you if you've signed a similar one of these with another agent or a brokerage somewhere, and they may have extended the time, like I mentioned when I started, right? So, you could be represented by somebody and not know it. Number 7, this is the compensation. So this says buyer understands that broker fee and commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. And like I said, may be paid by the seller, the buyer, landlord, tenant, or third party, or by sharing or splitting the fees and commission between the brokers. Okay. So this is something new. And it's sometimes hard to discuss this and bring it up when we have just met and have only talked to each other for 10 minutes, okay? Additional terms, this could be just anything that's relevant to it. This just keeps talking about the compensation. 8, consent to delegation. Buyer delegates the authority for the brokerage to appoint another licensed agent within the same agency. That means that the broker can find somebody else to help you if I'm out of town, or if a conflict arises, okay? There's dispute resolution, talking about that. Property condition and indemnification just says that you acknowledge that we are relying on information provided by the seller or the seller's agent, absent anything that we can see visually with our eyes, okay? Fair housing statement, wire fraud is a big thing now. And then we scroll down to the bottom and that's the signature page. And for whatever reason, there's an amendment to the agreement. So if something changes, then there's space for us to do that. So I know that that's not really, it's hard to follow. That's sort of a word salad document and really deep into the rabbit hole. But I just want to get it out there for people to have an understanding that when you connect with a buyer's agent, if they're following the rules correctly, you have to sign one of these prior to being allowed to show the property. And one last thing before I shut this down, I always ask if the seller agent can disclose if the seller is paying any buyer brokerage compensation to my brokers, the Athens Real Estate Company, or Allie Rapp-Lee's brokerage. She's our broker. And so I try to have that information going into showings so that I can help you make an informed decision. So this is Brian Kapple with the Athens Real Estate Company, part of the Black Diamond Property Group. Quentin and I represent the entire Southeast Ohio region. And if you have any questions for selling or buying, just reach out to us. Also, be sure to like and share my YouTube channel. Really trying to grow it and, just make me feel good about myself. Hey, all right, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Be back soon.